All right, thanks again to Ryan Pace. Great to talk to him. I know Matt Nagy was recently on Lunch Talk Live with Mike Tirico. It's good to see the Bears get a little more involved. There was a period of time where they shied away from the national engagement. And look, I think it makes sense. And obviously, I've got a bias in all this, but it makes sense for as many teams as possible to be willing to do interviews and make people available because we are the conduit between the fans and the teams. And we try to ask the questions that fans would ask. We try to get the information that fans would be interested in. And we try to enhance the overall experience of following the NFL by getting these folks to talk and getting them in a setting other than a press conference is tough because a press conference is just like a question on this and a question on that and a question on that without any real flow or follow-up or conversation. And I don't think you see the real person the way that you do in a more extended interview. So we appreciate Ryan Pace for giving us some of his time today, and we hope to be talking to him and Coach Nagy in the future. All right, some of your questions here. PFTPM Posse, as usual, at the top of the stack. And I'm going to do this. I was going to try to do it on my laptop, but I think it's easier to just work off of my cell phone here. Philadelphia's Brandon Graham said trash talk can replace fan noise, but how will NFL officials keep us from hearing the extremely vulgar words without constant bleeps ruining it or a delay that could impact gambling? The PFTPM Posse would love to hear it unbleeped, but knows NFL equals no fun league. Well, I'll tell you what. You know what? I kind of like the ESPN2 option that we saw for The Last Dance. Would it be possible that for cable broadcast, now it's not going to be possible for FCC-regulated three-letter network over-the-air FCC broadcast, but for cable games, you could do two feeds. You could do the adult feed, the Life is Rated R feed with all of the profanity. I don't know that the NFL is going to go all in for that, but we see it every year on Hard Knocks. We see it on Amazon's All or Nothing. It's F-bomb this and F-bomb that. They embraced it there. So maybe that's where we're headed. Maybe The Last Dance is going to innovate sports coverage to multiple feeds if we're going to be hearing what these guys are saying. And now, it's not going to be easy to bleep. That's for sure. And that's the challenge for the FCC-regulated version of these broadcasts. What do you do if you're picking up all this language? Because, look, even though guys will be more aware of what they say if they know that the things they're saying in the trenches, on the field, on the sidelines, wherever can potentially be heard by the home audience. Once a game gets started, you're going to forget about it. You're going to get numb to it. You're going to just go about your business. Once your adrenaline gets flowing and your competitive juices are at their maximum, you're going to forget. Or you're just not going to care. A lot of these guys don't care. You think Sims would care? I mean, my God, he lets them fly all the time anyway, and he knows he shouldn't. If he was in a setting where it's up to them to bleep me, he'll let it fly all the time. And I think there's a lot of guys who think the same way, especially once they're out there and they're exerting effort, they're being hit, and they're tackling people. So I don't know what the solution is. I hope they find a way to make it work, even if it is aggressive use of the bleep button. I want to hear the unvarnished, unfiltered audio from the field, from the sidelines, and that would be part of these broadcasts if there isn't artificial crowd noise that's used. These are all things that people well above my pay grade are looking into to determine what is the right approach for the NFL and for the various networks. I love Coach Madden's advice, though, to Fred Gaudelli, the Sunday Night Football producer: shy away from the crowd noise, embrace the ambient noise that you pick up on the field, and that we're going to be able to hear much more loudly than we ever do if there is no fan noise in the stands. All right. Next up, PFTPM Posse. Does being critical of NFL general managers, coaches, owners, etc., impact your relationship with them or make it awkward when you're interviewing them? And if so, how? What about Barstool Big Cat, who has yet to they're trying to get him to join the PFTPM Posse. He's not going to do that. Let me just answer the question. Being critical of general managers, coaches, and owners does impact the relationship. That is the balance, and that is the challenge. And, as you get to know these folks, and I remember the first time I ever did anything by way of attending an NFL-related event. I went to Steelers training camp in 2006. First time I ever met Peter King. I went there and spent the day and, met some people. And as I was walking out of the facility, somebody who I know called me and said, "Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't start going to things. Don't start covering games. Don't start going to practices. Don't start interviewing people. Don't get to know these guys because you will lose your edge if you do." And I've always taken the position that there's a way to have the relationships, but also say what needs to be said when it needs to be said. And usually what that entails is having a level of sensitivity where if it's someone you know and you are going to rip them, you give them a heads up. And you say, hey, look, I got to do my job here. I just want you to be aware of what I'm going to be writing. I want you to be aware of what I'm going to be saying. And sometimes the benefit there is you get a different perspective. You get their perspective. You get their side of it, which is, even though I didn't go to journalism school, it's kind of the thing you're supposed to do. So you factor in their viewpoint before you finalize your own opinion. And actually that relationship can enhance, number one, my understanding of a situation, maybe guide me in a bit of a different direction once I have the benefit of that person's input. And it makes for a better take. It makes for a better opinion. It makes for a more informed overall assessment of a situation. So yeah, it definitely is an issue. When someone gives you access, number one, and now here's where it becomes a challenge. I try not to be even more of an ass to the people who don't give us access. I never want to be vindictive about it. And if it's a team that just says, no, we're not going to do it, and they never do it, I try not to let that influence my opinions, where it's like I'm always going after this team because this team doesn't make its coach, its GM, its owner, its whoever available. Because I don't think that's the right thing to do. The right thing to do is have your honest opinion shaped by what you see, what you hear, what is happening, and you come up with your criticism that way. And I don't think it's right to just dump on whoever it is that isn't giving you access. Although I guess that would be a more effective way to get access, because sometimes if you dump on someone enough, they give you access because they want you to stop. That's how and it wasn't intentional. This was in 2005. First big, I said the first big event I ever did was the 2006 training camp with the Steelers. The 2005, I had to sit down with Nick Saban, and that was a direct result of the fact that so many of the media members in Miami couldn't stand him, and they were feeding to me all of the stuff he was doing that pissed them off. So we were hammering him, and that resulted in the Dolphins reaching out and trying to set up a meeting and an interview. It was kind of a way to have a truce. I didn't set out to do it that way, but that's when I realized the power of being an ass. If you're an ass enough, you do get access. But I don't think that's right. I just don't think that's right. I don't think it's right to strategically say, I'm going to go after this person to try to shame them or basically squeeze them, leverage them into giving me an interview. I just don't think that's right. You form your opinions based upon what you see, what you hear, and you go forward. And if you get access, you get access. If you don't, you don't. All right. Hope that answers the question. If not, tough shit. Sorry. We'll bleep that, I guess. Let's see. PFTPM Posse, good memory. In your first PFT Sunday mailbag, you mentioned an exciting new twist on how we've done things coming to PFT Live in the not too distant future. Any updates on this? Anything you can share? No. Next question. Let's go. James McDonough, Dr. J144. This is one of those that I didn't read in advance. What goes through your mind when you post an article which you know about half of the people are going to be angry about because they see it as politics? Can you really brush off the criticism, or is some of it hard to ignore and frustrating? That's a great question. Here's what happens. When these issues come up that are potentially political, but they are connected to the NFL, because what we're seeing right now, multiple NFL figures sounding off about what happened to George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd. And I let it go for a couple of days because I didn't know what to do. But then, wish I had a cough button down here. But then when the Vikings issued a statement about it, it's like, all right, here we go. The NFL team issuing a statement about the murder of George Floyd. They didn't call it a murder. I did, because it was. I'm going to go with it then. And when I write the story, I know it's going to piss off certain people. And I know when I tweet it, I'm going to get the stick to sports reaction and other pejoratives that are thrown my way. And I just don't care. Now, look, at some level, you do care when you feel like you're being unfairly attacked by someone, and when you know that they're doing it because they don't want to deal with the message, so they're going to attack the messenger. It really is that simple. I mean, the stick to sports crowd only activates in response to something that they disagree with or something that makes them uncomfortable. They don't react when you are saying something that they like. So I try to keep that in mind, that part of it is just the human nature way of dealing with somebody expressing an opinion that makes the person who sees that opinion uncomfortable. And I think that a lot of what people are saying when it comes to the murder of George Floyd, right, the people pushing back, I'm not going to say they're racist or that they support police officers murdering African Americans and other minorities, but just the concept, the topic, all the discussion makes them uncomfortable because it invades on their law and order top-down view of how things should be, and the police are always right no matter what, and life is easier if we have these bright lines and we don't question the authority of the police and they have the discretion to do whatever needs to be done. And anything that makes me uncomfortable in that mindset that disrupts that viewpoint is going to piss me off and get me to tell people to stick to sports. Now, look, this is an extreme example. It makes it harder. It makes it harder for the people who would be inclined to ignore the message, to retreat to that stick to sports mantra. But I think what's happening here is, if you can find a deflection, like pointing to the riots, pointing to the looting, that becomes the thing that you pivot to. So you don't have to feel uncomfortable about the fundamental problem, which is the murder of George Floyd. You've got something else you can talk about. So instead of being uncomfortable about something that needs to be changed, you would rather not see change because you don't want the authority of the police officers to be undermined on a specific or general scale. You pivot to these other things, whether it's decrying the rioting, decrying the looting, or decrying those who are staying not in their lane by talking about these uncomfortable issues. But I ultimately, look, if you're not human if it doesn't bother you, but at the same time, I consciously accept the fact that I need to do it, because ultimately, if you think it's the right thing to do, and look, I think that when you have developed a platform, and I've worked hard over the last 20 years to develop this platform, and I'm not using that aspect of it to promote an agenda that I think is unfair or improper. These are areas where I believe that the right thing to do is to say they murdered George Floyd, and we need to pay attention to the message that a guy like Colin Kaepernick was sending back in 2016. You may disagree with the method, but the message is what he was trying to get people to talk about, and that is the fact that there are so many police officers out there who aren't properly trained in how to deal with difficult situations. They pull out the gun and they fire it when they shouldn't, or they bury their knee into the neck of somebody for more than 7 or 8 minutes and kill them, whatever the case may be. There is reason to be concerned about whether or not every police officer has the requisite skill and training and experience to properly interact with people without killing them. That's a viable message. So I believe in that. I think it's the right thing to do. I don't know why anyone would support police brutality against anyone. So I'm going to use this platform that I've built when I believe it's the right thing to do to send that message, especially when that message is being sent by the men and by the organizations involved in the National Football League. And that's my prerogative. If people don't like it, there's plenty of other places where you can get your sports news from people who either don't care about sending a message of right and wrong on the platforms they've built, or they've got different messages that they're going to send through those platforms. And the same thing with the pandemic. And this is the thing that has driven me crazier than anything I've encountered in 20 years of doing this. And I know that the national will has kind of moved the needle toward opening up everything and trying to get back to normal. But, early on, when social distancing was more prevalent, when the stay-at-home orders were as clear as they could be, the reactions from people when we'd point out, hey, probably not the best idea for Dak Prescott and Des Bryant to be out having a workout, touching the same football, clearly within 6 feet of each other in the early days of the pandemic before the peaks of the infection came, and we were all being told what we needed to do. It was amazing to me how many people got mad about that. I mean, it's the right thing to do, and I really, I don't think these are controversial positions. It's just a sense of what is right and what is wrong. And when it comes down to people like George Floyd and what happened to him, I'll say what I've written at the website and what I've written on Twitter. You either care about the well-being and the rights of others, or you don't. It's that simple. It's a binary choice. You care about others or you don't. And if you don't, just own it, right? Just own it. Don't try to act like you're something that you're not. If you don't care about others, own it. Don't make those who do care about others feel bad about it. Don't attack them for disrupting your little peace and quiet corner of the world where you'd rather not have anyone pointing out that there is a chance that you're wrong, that there is a chance that you lack the soul, you lack the heart, you lack the caring for your fellow man, to be upset when police officers kill a man who, look, he was suspected of committing a crime, but my God, forgery, passing a counterfeit bill, whatever it was not hardly anything close to the kind of thing that would allow the use of any type of potentially lethal force. So you either care or you don't. I care, and if you don't, that's your problem. And if you don't want to come visit PFT, if you don't want to take in the PFTPM podcast, if you don't want to watch PFT Live, if you don't want to go to the Twitter page, that's your prerogative. That's your prerogative. And part of me would rather you only be part of this community if you share in my belief that we should care about the rights and the well-being of our fellow men and women, regardless of what they look like, regardless of their backgrounds, regardless of who they are. We are all in this together. We are all Americans, and I don't think it's healthy for anyone to start drawing lines and saying that certain groups have greater rights than others. All right, let's move on to the next question. Leapers 500, what is the plan for teams who have multiple players test positive? How will testing work? Will it be daily, and will teams be sequestered? I still don't know what the plan is ultimately going to be. I know what I think it should be. What I think it should be is very simple. There should be an airlock at every team facility. And everyone who shows up should be required to take a test, to test negative before they can enter the facility. Every person, every day, needs to test negative. Now, I think there may be certain people that don't need to test negative, but I'm talking about football staff, coaches, players, trainers, anybody who's going to be in that petri dish that is the locker room needs to test negative before they enter. And I also think they need to test negative before they exit. I think part of the NFL's responsibility to the community is to make sure that no one is coming out of a facility after having tested positive or actually become positive for the coronavirus during the time they're at the facility. Now, look, I don't know enough about the science to know how long it takes to go from exposure to testing positive. But I just think as a basic practical matter, more testing is going to be better than less testing. Testing every day on the way in and on the way out, I think, is the only way to do it. And by the time we get to August and September, I think there'll be more than enough tests to do it the right way. I don't know how long it's going to take to turn around the results, but obviously you need a test where you can either get a pinprick of your finger or swab the inside of your mouth and know within 5, 10, 15 minutes whether or not you're positive for the coronavirus. And look, I was told several weeks ago that, away from public eye, there's a lot of stuff happening to create the advancements necessary to get to the point where the testing will be that simple. And also the antigen status. What does it mean to have the coronavirus antibodies? Does it mean you can't get sick from it? Does it mean you can't infect someone else, even if you're exposed to the virus again? We'll know more about that by September. There's some tests and some research being done in Korea that I think has been very illuminating from the standpoint of potentially getting the NFL to the point where it can say, hey, if you're positive for the antibodies, you're good to go. Fill the stadiums. That would be great news for the NFL if that's the truth. It would be great news for society if that's the truth, because anyone who's positive for the antibodies knows they don't have to be worried about getting it, and they don't have to worry about giving it to someone else, because that's the other side of this. And that's one of the things that bothers me about this. The people, and there's folks in the media who, I'm not going to name names, you know who they are and they know who they are. People who I think are deliberately selling a message to people who want to hear it. This is the flip side of what I was saying earlier. There are people out there who get pissed off when someone says something that makes them uncomfortable because it makes them doubt their own views, and it makes them think that their views may not be the right views. On the other side of the coin, you're going to have people who are deliberately saying things, whether they believe them or not, and I believe that some of these folks who are saying these things don't really believe it, but they're trying to pander to the folks who want to hear that. It's the flip side of cramming your fingers in your ears and saying, I'm not listening. This is the, ooh, I really want to listen to this. Ooh, thank you very much. You're making me feel better about the decisions I'm making and the positions I'm taking because you get me. You understand me. You're saying what I want to hear. Because I think the message that's being said to a lot of those people, and I think it ends up becoming, you know, a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, this idea that, you know, I'm allowed to take risks. I'm an American. I can take risks. I have the freedom to take risks. And hey, I'm going to go live my life. I'm not going to go hide under the bed. If I get coronavirus, I'll deal with it. Well, that's fine if it wasn't something that you can infect someone else with. That's the thing that amazes me about this. You can infect someone else. It may not affect you. It may not make you sick, but you can give it to someone else and they could die from it. It's that simple. They could die from it. Well, the only people who have to worry about it are people who are older and who have pre-existing conditions. Folks, do you realize how many people are out there who have diabetes and they don't know they have diabetes? Not everybody who is diabetic knows they're diabetic. There's always a period of time, and for some people, it can be months, if not years, before they go to a doctor and they recognize that the reason they don't feel good every day is because they got type 2 diabetes. And it's a hell of a way to find out that you're diabetic if you get COVID-19 and die from it. So, you know, this isn't as clear, and it's not as simple. And it's not basically a matter of saying, I'm willing to take the risk of getting the coronavirus. You're taking the risk that you're going to give it to someone else. You're going to give it to someone that you think it won't kill. And look, I don't need to see the numbers to know that, you know, we've seen the names, we've seen the faces, we've seen the ages. And I would suspect that the younger folks who have died from this, not every single one of them had a serious health condition and knew they had a serious health condition. So that's why there needs to be a little more concern here. And I think that's part of the responsibility the NFL has. It's part of the responsibility the media has. And hopefully we'll get to the point where there is a way to conduct the season in a manner that is safe to the players, that is safe to the public, and that allows the games to be played. And that's ultimately what I want. I mean, that's the other thing too. Just because we take the time to articulate the potential things that could affect the season because of the pandemic, doesn't mean we're rooting against the season, people. It's possible to be concerned about the things that could screw up the season and to articulate that because you hope that somebody is planning for it so it doesn't screw up the season. We're not rooting for there to be no season. We're rooting for the people who are in a position of power and influence to anticipate the things that could come up and to identify those things and have a plan for those things so it doesn't screw everything up, so it doesn't require the NFL to either not start the season at all or pull the plug in October or November if there is a second wave that overwhelms the country. So, I mean, that's just, again, fundamental guiding principle. You either care about your fellow man or you don't. And if you don't, you know what? You just need to admit it to yourself. It's okay. You have the right to be an uncaring prick. It's your right. I'm not saying you shouldn't be, but go be an uncaring prick and leave the rest of us alone. Don't infringe on our ability to care about other people. Don't make us feel bad because we care. Don't attack us for having an agenda of fairness and justice and equity and basic level of care for our fellow man. Just go live in a hole somewhere. Go create your own little society somewhere with all the other pricks and leave the rest of us alone. It's that simple. Sorry to the pricks out there who don't care about other people. Actually, I'm not sorry. What else do we have here? Corey Joskowitz, barring any Clippers-type scandals, what do you think would be the next team to have ownership available for sale? Owners don't want to sell because teams only appreciate, but there have to be people like David Tepper chomping at the bit to get their hands on a team. Here's the thing to watch, and I'm not going to name names, but here's what you need to watch. You need to watch for teams that are primarily owned by someone who is older. What happens when that person dies? Will the estate, will the holdings of that family be sufficient to pay the estate taxes, to allow someone else to inherit the equity that was held by the person who dies, or will it force the sale of the team? And again, I'm not going to name names. I don't want to go down that path. But there are multiple franchises out there where there's a question of whether or not there would be enough cash. Is there enough cash to write the gigantic check to the government for the estate tax and still be able to own the team? Do you have to sell some of the team to pull it off? Do you have to sell all of the team to pull it off? That's how Jack Kent Cooke's family ended up selling the Washington franchise. It's how Joe Robbie's family ended up selling the Dolphins franchise. It's happened multiple times in the past. I'm sure there's other examples I can think of, but that's really the key. When there is the passing of typically a patriarch of the family, but sometimes a matriarch of the family, like what we saw with the Rams. The Rams got sold after George Frontiere passed. Now, part of it may be the family just doesn't want to take over the team. That's what happened with Ralph Wilson when he passed. Nobody in the family wanted to run the team, so they sold the team, period. They may very well have been able to pay the estate taxes and continue to own the team if they wanted to, but that's what we need to watch. Will teams that are held by a family, will those teams be able to continue to be held by that family once the one person who owns the biggest chunk of the team passes away? That's when the window of opportunity is going to open. And, what happened with David Tepper and the Panthers, there was a scandal involving Jerry Richardson that forced him to sell the team. But if he hadn't done that, when Jerry Richardson passed away, and he still hasn't yet, but when he would have, that would have been the moment where the team likely would have been available for sale. But look, here's the thing. Not many of these teams come available for sale, and they do appreciate to the point where it becomes harder and harder to find anyone who has the money to buy the minimum equity and then has the money to actually operate the team. All right, let's see what else we have here. I don't know, 40, how long do you think it takes for Marcus Mariota to replace Derek Carr? I don't know that it's definitely going to happen. Just because it happened to Mariota last year in Tennessee with Ryan Tannehill, I don't think it's a done deal. And I get accused all the time of being too hard on Derek Carr. I just think it's kind of funny that he's as sensitive as he is, because you always think that an NFL quarterback is going to be a little more thicker skinned. It's one thing for me to be thin skinned. I'm not an NFL quarterback. I'm not out there in that pit of physicality with guys constantly buzzing around me and trying to hit me and trying to hurt me. Not trying to hurt me, but you get the point. They're trying to hit me, and it may hurt me if they hit me. Intercepting passes, making calm decisions. It's weird to see somebody who's thin-skinned in that setting. I don't know. I kind of think that maybe Derek Carr is going to be good enough this year to hold off Marcus Mariota, and I just wonder whether Marcus Mariota is good enough to take over the job. Ryan Tannehill was a guy who I think was better than he got credit for. I don't know that Marcus Mariota falls in that category, so I don't think it's inevitable that Mariota is going to take over for Derek Carr. Now, if Carr gets hurt, that's going to be an opportunity for Mariota to maybe take the job, but we'll see if that happens. All right, let's see what else we have here. Probably should wrap this up. Total program today, I think we're well over an hour, which makes it one of the longer PFTPMs we've had in a while. Let me just look for one more here. One more. Last one, CZ Wald. This gets back to the George Floyd situation. Thank you for the great article on George Floyd in my home city, non-football related, and I'm behind on PFT, but what are your general thoughts on the subsequent days of rioting? How do we better ensure peaceful protest? Look, I don't think rioting is an appropriate way to handle a situation where an injustice was committed. But the reality is, when you have people who believe that injustice is done, and when steps aren't immediately taken to address the injustice, you run the risk that people are going to demonstrate, and that demonstration may cross the line when you allow that group dynamic to take over. So I think the more swiftly that justice is done, the more quickly that we avoid the possibility of riots and looting and other things that shouldn't happen. Now, it's not an acceptable outcome, but it shouldn't be a surprise when it happens, when there is a fundamental injustice that is routinely visited upon certain elements of society, and it never gets any better. I mean, we have a problem. We have a flaw in our system that continues to rear its ugly head in the death of people who should not be dying at the hands of police officers. If we don't fix that, if we don't fundamentally address the problem and fix it, there will be a stronger and stronger sense of injustice. You've got a problem that is hiding in plain sight that no one seems to be doing anything about fixing. with each passing example of that problem taking a life that it shouldn't have taken, you do run the risk that the volume is going to be a little bit louder and a little bit louder and a little bit louder. And eventually it's going to explode. And that's what's happening in Minneapolis. And it's unfortunate. The rioting should not happen. The looting should not happen. The police precinct should not be set on fire. This should not be going on. But ultimately, if we achieve a spot where police officers are properly trained, properly held accountable for their behavior, and ultimately properly interact with other people of all races, of all creeds, of all colors, of all backgrounds, when all people receive the same treatment and fair treatment and proper treatment from law enforcement, the people who walk around among us with lethal force and the ability to use it, and at times it feels like whenever they want to without repercussion, until we get to a point where there is repercussion from the system, that's when, unfortunately, until we get there, there will continue to be these kinds of incidents. So, look, how do we stop the rioting? We stop the events that light the fuse on the riot. And when you have a press conference yesterday from a local prosecutor who says, well, I don't see anything here that justifies prosecution, that's one of the ingredients in people who recognize a fundamental unfairness reacting. And it's wrong to react the way they did, but that's what happens when you have case after case after case, incident after incident after incident. The frustration grows and eventually it explodes. So the greater obligation for our politicians, for our leaders, for our people, demand more, expect more, and eventually maybe we get more from people in law enforcement who from time to time are committing heinous crimes against American citizens. That is what needs to end. And the sooner that ends, the sooner the rioting will stop, and the sooner the other problems associated with what happened to people like George Floyd will come to a conclusion. The PFTPM podcast comes to a conclusion. We appreciate your participation. We will be back on Monday on PFT Live. We'll try to do some more PFTPM podcasts. We continue to try to line up coaches and general managers because what the hell else are they doing, right? And I think they like the Zoom interaction. I think that a lot of these folks prefer to pop open a laptop and have a conversation where they can see me and I can see them, as opposed to doing it over the telephone. There's a greater personalization of the conversation. So I enjoy doing them, and hopefully we'll have more of them coming up in the month of June. We hope you all have a safe weekend, and we, again, appreciate your ongoing support of ProFootballTalk.com and all of our various products. We'll talk to you again next week.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.